Pikmin is a game. And this is a video about it. Normally we talk about Pokemon, but like, if you remove the vowels, you can't even tell the difference between Pikmin and Pokemon. And from what I hear, Pikmin is a pretty good game series.
Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! I get it, you know, Pikmin, Pokemon, just a couple vowels off. Yeah, it's pretty close.
Pikmin 3 Deluxe is here, and being a game with a load of cute little characters, I thought, hey, we should do that thing where I explained them. And here we are. I suppose that makes this Every Pikmin Explained. Now, let's assume that you know at least the basics of Pikmin, but just in case you don't, here is a quick synopsis of Pikmin by Arlo. Thank you. Now then, let's explain the Pikmin themselves. Pikmin were named Pikmin by Captain Olimar, as the little creatures resemble pick carrots, a food from his homeworld. But also, they are little men that you pick from the ground. Pikmin! Now, the Pikmin are crazy. On top of being cute, it seems they are able to understand signals and commands given to them, and similar to ants, alone they are weak, but together, they can move D-sized batteries. This basically applies to all Pikmin. But getting to the more specific species of Pikmin, we have the most iconic, the Pikachu of the Pikmin, the red Pikmin. What is it about the red Pikmin that makes them red? Is it their resistance to fire? Or maybe their big and thin noses? Or perhaps is it the great fire that burns in their souls? Being one of the first 3 Pikmin in the game, the red Pikmin is almost the basic type, as they are essentially the very first Pikmin in almost every game. And no, I'm not going to lie, I didn't play Hey Pikmin, because, let's be honest here, is it really a Pikmin game? Technically in name, yes, but in our hearts, no. But the red Pikmin in every game has the same appearance. An extremely bright red little carrot dude with a thorny nose. And it's this nose that is the true signifier of its type, not just its color. You see, every Pikmin has a secondary trait in addition to their coloration. Much like the Pikmin's abilities, red Pikmin are red, and they resist fire, and their second ability grants them more offensive power, a 1.5 combat damage increase. And that's not because it's red, however. It's because of its thorny nose. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that it uses its sharp nose while grappling the creature to slam its proboscis into the creatures they are attacking. I mean, all Pikmin fight the same way, slamming their heads into the thing until it dies. When I was a kid who didn't know any better, I thought they were whipping them with their leaves because I would get grass cuts like a bunch of grass-type moves in Pokemon. And like, I know, weirdo alert, who thinks that? It's clearly a headbutt. So, red Pikmin attack good thanks to their super sharp nose, stabbing into things. Oh, and in the case of Pikmin 3, they are much faster at destroying those pesky dirt walls because again, stabby stab noses, good shovels. But now, is red equals fire so they are fire resistant the only bit of logic connecting the 2 design elements? Here's a fun fact that may be related. The wildfire retardant that firefighters drop from planes is actually dyed red to help the pilot know where they've dumped. And perhaps that's the idea with these Pikmin. They have a natural sort of coating of something similar, and by media association with reality, they're the same color. And yes, that would mean red Pikmin are sticky to the touch, as the fire retardant is super sticky too, hence why it stops fires from burning the wildlife. The only thing that makes it come off is a lot of water, which we know kills red Pikmin. Heck, it kills all Pikmin, except the blue Pikmin, who we're going to talk about next. But first, let's talk about why Pikmin die in water. There are many reasons they might die, but the most obvious one is that they drown. It's totally possible to drown any plant, and especially a plant that has what seems to be lungs. I mean, they heave and ho-hum and make sound with their tiny faces, so Pikmin are a much more evolved species than just a plant. So maybe they don't have lungs exactly, but they do need whatever the poisonous gas Olimar can't have to live themselves. It's oxygen. And another real big problem with small creatures like Pikmin is their weakness to water's mighty tension. You see, when you're a normal human-sized creature, water is like a weak baby. But when you're the size of a dime or smaller, things get hard. Water molecules like to stick together, and you need to break that bond to get past the surface. You know that penny experiment you probably did in school? That's surface tension. Instead of the water flowing off of the penny, it pools and makes a bubble. Small creatures have a hard time getting out or getting unstuck from water because of this. It's almost like a sticky goo to them, similar to honey for us. But blue Pikmin, with their tiny little mouths, ho ho! They treat water like nothing. Also, yeah, interestingly enough, they are the only Pikmin to have mouths. Most Pikmin seem to eat nectar with their magical faces, but blue Pikmin can actually eat it. And it is, in fact, this tiny mouth that allows them to freely navigate in water. And I'm not kidding, there's actually a captain's log that explains how they do it. Captain's log. Stardate. Way too late. I should have done this earlier, and now I'm going to lose this game for sure. Deep in the cave, I discovered, in the forest, I encountered a blue Pikmin. These blue fellows have something resembling gills on their cheeks, and they appear to be amphibious, surviving both in water and on land. The wonders of nature never cease to stun me, even in this alien land. So yeah, he kind of just does my job here. So yeah, that's why. Gills on the cheeks that likely go into the mouth and do all that stuff like fish. And then their blue coloration is because they love the water and have adapted to have a blue camouflage-like color to hide from predators while in the water, because water reflects the sky, and that's why water is typically blue. Yeah. And they love water so much that when in their idle stance, they will go and jump into nearby water to save other drowning Pikmin of other colors. They're little lifeguards! Honestly, they are pretty great and normal little Pikmin. However, just like all of the other Pikmin, they are weak to all of the other elements, like electricity. How is there just electricity in such a large amount just laying around in this post-apocalyptic wasteland Earth? We just don't know. But back to Pikmin anatomy, when they get electrocuted, they show a tiny little skeleton. You know, like how many cartoons depict characters being zapped? But does this mean that these plant creatures have bones? Maybe not. It could be a notochord, a hardened stem, which many simple creatures, mostly the same size as Pikmin, possess. But like, what if they do have tiny little bones? They have tiny little souls that rise up to heaven. So like, why not make it even more saddening when they die? Like the same little helpless scream that they give, but they also let out a crunch. A crunch with their little bones. Their bones snap all over their body. It's so sad. So yellow Pikmin, that's where I was going with the electricity bit. They are distinctively different from red and blue Pikmin, as yellow Pikmin have huge ears and are yellow, and like electricity. It's like the Pikachu of Pikmin. Also, the yellow Pikmin are lighter, so they are able to be thrown further, but they appear to be the same size as the other Pikmin. So it must either be a density variant, making them lighter, or their big ears help them fly, like fletching on an arrow, or the tails on those Nerfamajigs. So in the first game, the yellow Pikmin didn't actually have the electricity feature. Instead, they were only lighter and could carry bomb rocks. But here's a question, what makes them so special that only they can carry the rocks? Well, we know that in the beta, all Pikmin were going to be able to carry them at first, but yellow Pikmin were a wee bit weaker in terms of usage. All the puzzles that required yellow Pikmin were much later into the game, so they were comparatively useless compared to the red and blue Pikmin, so they had to be given something else special, especially considering that electricity wasn't a hazard at all until Pikmin 2 came out. And then in Pikmin 3, yellow Pikmin are actually able to conduct electricity instead of just destroying electrified gates. It's neat. Anyways, let's talk about plants and why some of them are really good at electricity. Plants drink water and have water in them. Higher water content, better conductor. Simple as. Now as for why yellow has huge ears, well, I'm not sure. Normally ears are used as detection apparatuses, but these Pikmin don't have the special finding ability like white Pikmin, nor are they in need of a way to cool down their body by spreading their blood out in a thin area like the ears, like what elephants and rabbits and such do. Perhaps then they could very well have just been given these ears so that they are a sort of cutie pie Pikmin. They even have their own little voice, and I guess the ears do make them more ooh-woo, you know? Plus now with our three main Pikmin, we have a nose, a mouth, and ears. All that makes a face. So then, I mentioned white Pikmin, so let's do them next. These bug-eyed freaks are from the second game, and are much smaller and diminutive in comparison to even yellow Pikmin. However, those huge eyes, much like in real-life biology, give them incredible sight. They are able to see things that otherwise go unnoticed, even by the player, and have the handy ability to dig those treasures out of the ground. They also are immune to poison. So I talked about lungs earlier, and I guess that was more or less wrong, because when a Pikmin goes into a poison cloud, it seems to stick around their leaves or flowers, suffocating them unless they get out and shake it off. But white Pikmin don't care. They seem to ignore the poisonous gases, and it could be because of the specialized flower on their head. Instead of being white, it's purple, much like the color of poison in this game. meaning that they could have co-evolved alongside the poisonous plant, or they've just grown immune to the poison over the years, so they ignore poisons for some reason or another. I mean, heck, carbon dioxide is a poison in high enough amounts, and plants just absorb that. It's kind of their thing. However, I'm not entirely sure Pikmin grew from an evolution-based system. Pikmin are weird, okay? There are these things in the world called onions, essentially their homes and what seems to be their reproductive centers, gathering nutrients to create these little hands that bring more food back. And yet, there are no white or purple onions in the game. Instead, the way you get white and purple Pikmin are through the use of candy pop buds, flowers that spit whites and purples out when you toss Pikmin into them. So they just get changed entirely. So you could take a red and make him a white or purple. Now, I know this is probably just a game mechanic because, let's face it, if you had infinite purple, the game would be pretty easy. But it's still interesting to think about a plant that changes your own morphology. Why would these both evolve to exist like this? Now, could it be that the onions are only asexually reproducing and they need the candy pop bud to reproduce otherwise? Hence the newer types of Pikmin incentivizing pollination? And why are the white and purple candy pop buds normally found underground? Well, that's likely just due to their symbiotic relationship with white Pikmin, who are also naturally found underground, and living underground would explain why they're so good at digging and seeing things underground. But now, why are white Pikmin the smallest? It could be that the white Pikmin needs a smaller body because it doesn't breathe the exact same substance, hence its immunity to poison. But the downside of being immune to poison is that there isn't much of what it actually breathes in the atmosphere, thus limiting its size. This falls in line with the leading theory as to why prehistoric animals were also comparatively huge compared to modern animals. There was a lot more oxygen in the atmosphere back then, thus lungs could support bigger bodies easier. But back to the tiny, immune to poison white Pikmin. They also have the uncanny ability to kill predators that ingest them, meaning they are normally fatally poisonous themselves. Could this be a byproduct of the Pikmin's poison immunity? Is it storing the poison somewhere inside of its body to make it self-poisonous? This is actually how a lot of poisonous animals get their poison. They eat poisonous plants and things so much that now there's just poison going through their veins or stored in glands all the time. Even poison dart frogs aren't actually poisonous at first. They need to eat a load of poisonous, unfertilized frog's eggs first, provided by their mother, who puts poison on them. So how did the first poison dart frog get poisonous? But this poison may also be why the white Pikmin is so brightly colored against a natural background. White is pretty obviously a threatening color. Oh, and they are extremely fast compared to other Pikmin too. Another trait of small prey creatures that lack any real defenses. Neat. But speaking of speed, let's slow it down with purple Pikmin. These chunky beasts are one of my favorite Pikmin because they look like little sumos. And for some reason, I love the idea of commanding hordes of tiny sumo wrestlers. Sounds like a weird fever dream, but it's a video game by Nintendo. But these round little Pikmin are only similar to sumo in their funny-shaped heads. Being a troglodytic species, they are found only underground. Basically, they are burrowers, not made for the surface world, hence why they have feeler hairs on the top of their head to find roots and other things in the dark. This is also possibly the reason they are so fat. They need to save energy because digging is hard work, so they eat huge amounts all the time. And because they dig all the time, they are 10 times stronger than other Pikmin. But the downside is that they got tiny feet. They are so slow. But thankfully, all that chonk also makes them immune to wind and most knockback. Oh, and I think they might have bad eyesight. Again, because of their subterranean lifestyle. They have a hard time seeing threats, which makes them immune to panic, at least. So that's neat. Then rock Pikmin are similar in that they are big and they heavy. These tough little dudes are basically rocks with Pikmin inside of them. And we all know that when you throw rocks, you break stuff. And that's exactly what these are used for. Breaking stuff. Mainly ice, glass, or even buggy body carapaces. Anything that shatters, really. However, what they boast in throwing damage, they lack in actually being able to hang on to their target. They are too weak to hold themselves up because they are heavy rocks. Alf then must be ripped because he can yeet these dudes just as far as normal Pikmin. Unlike Olimar with purples, who are heavy too. But that doesn't seem very likely, so this gets me thinking that these rock Pikmin must be made of something not super dense, but still extra strong. That way, they wouldn't be too heavy, but they would still be able to shatter crystal-like stuff. Oh, and did I mention that they are immune to being crushed? Thank the Lord these guys exist. No more will bad guys just sort of step and ruin my zero death run. So considering all these properties, I'm thinking they gotta be made of some sort of carbon, like graphite. Extremely strong, shiny, looks like a rock Pikmin, but it's light enough to be a normal Pikmin weight. Yeah, it's probably something like that. How they adapted into this form, however, is currently unknown. Maybe Pikmin 4 will explain.
Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin!
Or we could try something. Maybe they work like rock-type Pokemon. They could very well just be sentient rocks. I mean, regular Pikmin are basically sentient plants, but I think the easiest thing to accept is that rock Pikmin are just some other sort of Pikmin, covered in a naturally synthesized rocky graphene armor. And then they chip bits away to appear more natural, making it easier to blend in. I guess it's possible. Now then, winged Pikmin, or as some like to call them, fairy Pikmin, because they are just so gosh darn small and cute. I mean, look at these little guys. U to the W to the U. They got little compound eyeball goggles. How cute. They are good for carrying things over stuff, and that's about it. They aren't great at fighting because they are so small. Smaller than white even. They're like little gnats. They are sort of a one-trick pony. They do the thing that they were made to do. Solve the puzzles you need solved. However, their ability to just take fruit back over the entire maze of walkways is really nice. Now, if only they would stop stealing the items when idle, I swear. So yeah, they fly. Flying Pikmin fly. It's kind of a simple Pikmin. Oh, they resist stuff on the ground because they just fly over it. Hard to be hurt by ground things when you aren't on the ground, you know? Now, there are a few other Pikmin that I'll just mention here but won't really get into because they aren't actually Pikmin, like Shroomin and Bulbmin, or the 14 different color onions we see at the ending of Pikmin 1 as Olimar takes off, or the bad end where we see this weird thing happen with Olimar and an onion. Shroomin are just normal Pikmin being mind-controlled by the spores of a mushroom enemy in Pikmin 1, and Bulbmin are gross creations that will never see the light of day, mainly because you can't take them outside of the caves. Maybe they would die, or maybe they just don't like sun. Either way, Pikmin are weird, right? And if you couldn't tell, Arlo likes Pikmin.
Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin! Pikmin, Pikmin, Pikmin!